There are many games that manage to create an incredible community, and yet have stopped receiving updates or start to stagnate over time, with development seemingly coming to a halt, or the game itself just losing touch with what it was originally about and thus falling into irrelevance. Plants vs. Zombies is arguably a good example of this. The first iteration of Plants vs. Zombies was released to the public on May the 5th, 2009. The game quickly became one of the most popular examples of a tower defense, with 312 million people globally having downloaded the game at some point. It is considered by many to be one of the best games of the 2000s. However, what really made it popular was its availability on every platform. PC, Xbox 360, PS3, hell, it was even available on mobile, which at the time was a massively untapped market. The game quickly developed a cult following, with George Fan, the creator, being put up for many awards for its creation. The game's simple charm and ease at which it took to play, as well as Rich Vernon's cartoonish style, when designing the Plants vs. Zombies game, made it an instant hit. Laura Shigehara, who created the music, also did a superb job, with her pieces being played on loop throughout the 50 levels with 29 tracks, many of which capture the feeling of the randomness but also the fun of the game perfectly. The game was unbelievably popular, and the second game was on the horizon, with PopCap recently being bought out by EA, and it made the fanbase truly believe that the sky is the limit. It's fair to say that the original Plants vs. Zombies is a cult classic, up there with legendary games from the early 2000s such as Temple Run, Angry Birds, and Cut the Rope. The second game was, again, hugely popular. Unlike the first, however, it was free, and there were in-app purchases, which to this day continue to be a controversial topic. Personally, I don't see an issue with this model, since, massive games like Fortnite, Warzone, as well as Star Wars The Old Republic all operate like this. A free game with an option to buy things in-game. And it's not like you're forced to buy them either, anyway. It is completely optional. EA get the majority of the abuse, despite this being a PopCap decision. But, I guess the EA hate is just an easy bandwagon to jump on, seeing as, it is nice to kind of romanticize about PopCap, I guess, being this kind of small indie company that does no wrong. The game has 200 million downloads globally and is still one of the most played and most loved PopCap games ever made. The game itself was fantastic, building on the foundation of an already hugely popular game with a superb sequel. The second game also saw the rise in commercialization of the company, with plushies, toys of, the iconic characters such as Pea-Shooter and Sunflower being made available by PopCap itself. One of the major downsides to the game was the lack of ability to play on anything other than mobile, however. Sure, like BlueStacks and other emulators do exist, but officially there is nothing apart from mobile. A huge positive about this game, though, unlike the first, is its replayability. You've got Penny's Pursuit Arena, and, multiple other challenges that you can replay, unlike the first game. The game has also a bigger impetus on strategy, and I see an overall kind of positive in that. Even if you do just want to play the game casually, there's also an option to play it more strategically, which I think is just fantastic. PvZ2 also has a very active modding scene, which is what makes the game slightly more fun, and it does rejuvenate it after all this time of being out. What I will say is also Plants vs. Zombies 2 is a big step up in difficulty from the first game, and that I am a huge fan of. PopCap went from strength to strength with the release of Garden Warfare, the first shooter game being released in 2014. It had many cool gimmicks and, rather funny mechanics, to be honest. The game itself was hugely popular and, in fairness, was a stab in the dark, going from a tower defense available on all platforms to a third-person shooter on console and PC was a huge risk. This game, however, was generally well received, with the multiplayer being a huge hit. Even Garden Ops, the third-person equivalent of kind of a more tower defense-like game, was received relatively well, and it's most commonly seen as the game's weakest game mode. The game itself was incredibly fun, with many of the game modes being similar to the kind of classic shooter modes, team deathmatch, as well as basically game modes that emulate kind of the Battlefield titles for a younger audience. This, in my opinion, was fantastic, and I thoroughly appreciated this game. It was fun, vibrant, and mostly inoffensively fun. It was a bunch of plants shooting zombies, and despite being a minor annoyance, there was very little to actually find frustrating about the game, apart from just being bad. But realistically, that's just going to happen in a shooter game, and, you either get good or you leave. It's just that simple. The game came out just at the right time for me. I'd just got the Xbox 360 and must have played the game a lot, really. It was incredibly fun, and having played the kind of other mobile games, I really began to love the series from here. The game was hugely simplistic and felt reminiscent of other kind of class-based shooters such as TF2. However, the game was undeniably different with other kind of iconic class-based shooters of the time, such as Overwatch. The main thing about Garden Warfare 2 was the little creativity. And the game felt as if there had been put, so much love into this. There were numerous classes, 8 in total, with 8 variants meant for each, which in total were having kind of different gimmicks, whether it be fire, ice, or whatever. This gave the game a really fun touch. Of course, people would, make the characters easier like Foot Soldier, but there's nothing wrong with that. In my opinion, though, the fun came from the slightly more obscure plants like Citrus Cactus or the Physicist, that once you learn how to use were arguably better than the kind of slightly simpler ones to use. At the end of the day, I harbour a lot of nostalgia for this game. It was not only very fun, but it also came at a time where I was happy. Its successor, Garden Warfare 2, dropped in 2016. It's mad because it seems like so much more recent than that. The game, in my opinion, was PopCap and EA's magnum opus. A brilliant game with more characters, more variants, and basically more of everything you could ever want. As far as games go, I'd say it's a solid 9 out of 10 out of 10. Sure, it could have had more, but you could say that about just about any game. This game was incredibly and critically acclaimed too. The game itself was ridiculously popular, and I can remember playing it over the summer of 2017 with some of my friends. I even met one of my best friends playing this game back in the day, just by chance on Boss Hunt. The game was amazing. The characters were balanced, and, now with the plant side having counters to Foot Soldier in the corn, and the zombies having to, a counter to a melee class. I wouldn't really call it a chomper counter because, God knows you can't quite reenact what that godless creature does. But, it's close enough. The game doesn't seem to lack in any huge areas. Some may argue it's pay to win, but in reality it's just not. Paying to get stuff for your character faster, sure, sometimes, it would be effective. But half the time you're just going to get hats, and that's just not pay to win. It's fun. The Garden Ops, which was the only kind of available for plants in the first game, was now available as well to zombies with Graveyard Ops. The previously zombie-only Turf Takeover became available for plants too, and despite being less true to the tower defense game, with the zombies attacking and the plants defending an objective, I think this was a superb change. The future looks bright. Fantastic game being updated recently with good content, such as the Gnome events and, other cool gimmicks like boss hunts, community challenges, and town hall events. It was just wonderful. The Gnome event tied all these together. From the boss hunts and town hall events, you get your hands on rainbow stars, which allowed you to take part in the Trials of Gnomus. And these, I've got to say, were some of the most unnecessarily difficult things to do ever. The hitboxes were horrible, and the amount of parkour challenges you would have to complete using these horrible movement mechanics just gives me nightmares to this day. After doing this, you would have to do a boss fight. Again, unnecessarily difficult. But if you did manage to do it, you were rewarded with really, really powerful characters. Hovergoat was just good, and personally as a support player, it was a dream come true. And then you have the Torchwood. Where do I start? This is the epitome of skill, a big tree that breathes fire and has an unimaginable amount of health, that does a humongous amount of damage on top of the fact that he has a shield that may as well be impossible to break. I think it's fair to say that Torchwood was a little bit good. The game, however, was great at what the original was good at, and built on that as well, with many of the really popular mechanics such as variants and character customization being at the fore of the game. Popular maps have been redesigned for the new game as well, and the future continued to look bright. At this point we begin to talk about legacy. The game's identity was now set out. was a comical yet creative game, and it was working. A third Garden Warfare was rumoured to be in the pipeline, and honestly, it would have been cool expansion for the franchise after the success of the first, and particularly the second game. Along with this, there was a new mobile game released, Plants vs. Zombies Heroes. PvZ Heroes was not massively advertised and was almost a niche release for the more kind of hardcore fans rather than, PvZ Advantage, which was massively advertised. It was a card game, working a bit like Supercell's Clash Royale with currency and turn-based moves. The game was not overall popular and it wasn't really played by many people. Sure, there was some really cool stuff to come out of it, but it wasn't a success like the other mobile games had been. It's not a bad game, and frankly it's a bit underrated, but it's nothing more than the other two Plants vs. Zombies, really. I mean, frankly, I think underrated is a good term because it's not good, it's not bad. It kind of cradles in the middle, and definitely pales in comparison to the other two iconic mobile games released by PopCap. Battle for Neighborville was dropped in 2019, and was immediately ridiculed. There was a new sort of worse art style, something that would become a feature of the new Plants vs. Zombies games. Battle for Neighborville was considered to be quite a poor game from day one. The game lacked the most popular gimmicks of the other games, that being character variants. There we, again, like the other Plants vs. Zombies games, had some pretty cool characters, new additions. This wasn't enough to keep a consistent player base for a long time. There was an actual storyline in this game too, however it was perceived by many to be quite poor, and the community as a whole were not too happy with it. There was a lot of good stuff in this game, however, and a very popular game was Battle Arena, the game kind of having a more competitive side, in one life per round experience, kind of mimicking Counter-Strike, Valorant or SND, that kind of thing, in this way. This was hugely popular and single-handedly kept the game alive for some time. However, people got bored after a while and, well, there just wasn't enough content to satisfy people. The game was good. It certainly had been a nice attempt, give Plants vs. Zombies a new leap. High risk, high reward move once again, after the massive success of Garden Warfare 2. And just like Plants vs. Zombies had done in the past, they were hoping this gamble would pay off. However, their luck had seemingly run out. Many critics were indifferent about the game, and the player base were pretty unhappy with it. This is almost a curse of this game. It is neither talks about negatively to be put in the underrated bracket, and it's not really talks about enough to be overrated. It's just in that limbo and no one really cares about it. The game died incredibly quickly, with the Plants vs. Zombies Battle for Neighborville community, does exist, but it is nowhere near the size of, Plants vs. Zombies 2 or Garden Warfare 2 for that matter. The game is dead. It's as simple as that. There's no real fault of PopCap either. They tried to be adventurous, they tried to do something different. Something in the past that worked out really well for them. However, this just wasn't it. It's hard to say what exactly is wrong with Battle for Neighborville, but it's just not the Garden Warfare games, and I think maybe that innately is what is wrong with it. Now we get to Plants vs. Zombies 3. PvZ 3 has had multiple soft releases, and there has, been some form of success with this. The game has had, a few good betas, and in terms of, good being, it's had a lot of positive criticism towards EA and PopCap from it. This, however, tends to be on the more negative side. The community doesn't like what they're seeing with this game. The art style, a bit like Battle for Neighborville, is not particularly what the community want to see. And the game itself is just innately not Plants vs. Zombies. The strategy of Plants vs. Zombies and Plants vs. Zombies 2 was that you were able to choose your own plans. As we know, this is not an option with Plants vs. Zombies 3. Things like this are the exact reason why people are frustrated with the new game, along with the overall kind of direction PopCap is going with, and it's worrying people. The game has seen a few changes from beta to beta, however it's not enough to give people hope. The main game is still so coveted, and yet this seems like a bastardization of it almost. I mean, people are writing off the game before it's even been released. And I do think it's wrong. However, by what people have been shown, it's not good at all. The magic of Plants vs Zombies, in my opinion, is being able to create your own defenses, be able to come up with your own decisions. Yet when you're spoon-fed what you're given and what you're facing, it just kind of takes away the magic of the game almost. This might just be reactionary, but personally I'm not a fan, and the majority of people are with me on this, that it's just not a good idea. It lacks creativity, something which the game has been lauded for years, and I think this is a real shame. So where is the future of the game? In my opinion, it's coming from the modding community. There are so many really creative projects in the works, such as Project Reflourished, a mod for Plants vs Zombies 2, Project Beautiful Town, a fan-made game, as well as Project Visionary, a mod for Garden Warfare 2. And this suggests a huge future for the games, however, an unofficial one at that. Reflourished works on the basis of Plants vs Zombies 2, however with new balances, revamps the world, added content, more challenging levels, with hard win conditions, as well as entirely new worlds. The mod is absolutely amazing, and I'd recommend it to anyone who plays the game on Android or PC. As with many mods, I don't think it's available on Apple devices, but give it a try, don't take my word for it. A warning as well, this mod is really difficult, and while being incredibly imaginative with the dynamics of the game, it is hard. Things I particularly liked about this mod was its loyalty towards the Plants vs Zombies product, with the mod being very much centred around the original game, with its own twists of course. One twist in particular I thought that was cool was the inventive new gimmick known as Resistance. This is available in Holiday Mashup, which is one of the new worlds, and it basically reduces the amount of effect certain plants would have on enemies. Say for example, freezing. Ice-based plants would have less of a freezing effect on zombies that are wrapped up in festive clothing. I mean, this is a really minor thing, but I think it's super cool. And again, it does add to the difficulty. Something that, I would keep in mind for this mod. Yes, I think this is something that's not too far off from a mechanic you'd also see from a Plants vs Zombies game anyway. So it's not only feels refreshing, but also not out of place. This mod is really well made, and clearly a lot of time has gone into it. If you haven't checked it out yet, I would highly recommend it, and I'll leave a link in the description. One thing that people quite like about it as well is that there's no paid elements to it, so kind of Toadstool or Ice Pea, or if you even like Chomper, they're all available with gems rather than with real money. So you can try out all the premium plants you wouldn't have maybe been able to try out beforehand, which is, a pretty cool upside if you're into that kind of thing. Project Beautiful Town is a fan-made game in the style of Plants vs Zombies, and has recently been released in English. The game was released in early 2022 and has been a huge success in China. With the translated model in English now, it is hoped that it will spread across the rest of the world. The game itself does not follow the kind of linear game of Plants vs Zombies in a similar way that the other tower defense games do, with missions kind of unlocking new plans. Instead, right at the start, you unlock all the plans, with some legacy plants available like Pea Shooter and Sunflower, but also some brand new plants, to me at least, as well as some ones from the other games, Garden Warfare or Plants vs Zombies Heroes. The game feels more like the original Plants vs Zombies in style, and has a really, really nice art style in my opinion, as well as some really inventive new plants and zombies that switch up the kind of Plants vs Zombies formula, giving its own little twist on it. The game doesn't necessarily feel like a Plants vs Zombies title from PopCap, which is why I feel like it works so well. The fun comes from difficulty, which is probably higher than that of Plants vs Zombies 2, an admittedly difficult game, and messing about with new strategies and plans allows the player to have fun, yet be challenged at the same time. The 102 plans available provide a really cool depth of new strategy, and ultimately, for a relatively small amount of levels, it provides a lot of replayability. My personal favourite game mode in this is Endless, as it provides a challenge which requires strategical resets every few rounds depending on how kind of the opposition line up. And games like this are going to be what will lead the game forward, at least temporarily. as not only as they keep Plants vs Zombies, community happy with the cool new ideas, they also allow PopCap, who I'm sure are aware of these games, to rethink the future project and possibly take on board some of the things the developers of these indie games are doing, if not the developers themselves. It has happened in the past that developers of indie games have actually been employed by the company themselves. A well-known example is with Minecraft, with the developer famous for the Aether mod, Brandon Pierce, now working with Mojang, and is currently working on projects with them. I don't see why PopCap wouldn't do the same with these new game developers, or at least, take some good ideas which the fanbase enjoy from them. Finally, we come to Project Visionary, which was released to the general public on the 26th of October 2022. The mod was a huge addition to Plants vs Zombies Garden Warfare 2, and it's clearly a passion project that's taken a huge amount of effort. The project has added new characters, new variants, an entire map revamp to the backyard, which I think is super cool. Gabrielle of LTM, the lead developer, has added 30 plus new characters to the game and has applied balancing changes to certain characters that were perceived to be overpowered. The mod essentially tries to, and I quote, bring back the feeling of when Garden Warfare 2 was still supported by PopCap. And this mod does exactly that, with a few cool changes and additions too. Not only do I believe PopCap wouldn't have necessarily done this, there are a lot of ideas and themes, like with Reflourish, do feel like trademark PopCap moves as well. And despite being kind of unofficially trademarked, there is that kind of comedy / light-hearted mechanic and wordplay that you would likely see in a PopCap EA game. Project Visionary has helped to kind of breathe life back into a game with Garden Warfare 2. I mean, sure, there was a little bit of hype with it coming to Steam, but other than that, the game's been quite quiet recently, and additions like this are really what's going to keep the game ticking. Unlike games like TF2, Garden Warfare has not managed to stay alive through long periods of time, instead support slowly dwindling and the game becoming irrelevant. Even with Plants vs Zombies fans who want to keep it alive, it's just becoming quite stale, because at this point most people have done everything around. This mod is fantastic, and if anyone hasn't played it, I would recommend it wholeheartedly. Ultimately, Plants vs Zombies as a game is dying. This is because the recent games have not been what the community wanted, and it hasn't really developed its own fan base either, which leaves it in this kind of negative limbo where there's no one that actively plays it, and there's no one that actively likes it either and is willing to defend it, or at least not a large group of people. With Plants vs Zombies 2, yes, there's a lot of people that don't like it, but there is also a very loyal fanbase behind it. And you don't see the same with Plants vs Zombies Heroes, or Battle for Neighborville, or even people defending Plants vs Zombies 3. I mean, there's hardly anyone doing that is not trying to just be contrarian. And I think the issue comes is PopCap are really inventive. They're constantly trying to reinvent the wheel, which is awesome. But the community itself doesn't necessarily want them to reinvent the wheel all the time. What ends up happening is people get upset because the changes aren't what they want, or the games aren't what they want, and all of a sudden it's, witch hunt, really. And this has to stop, because the games will not get better if people keep complaining. PopCap won't take any kind of further steps. What's ultimately going to happen is the games are going to stop being made, and we're not going to get anywhere. And ultimately, this game franchise will turn into so many others where there's no longer development, there's no longer a care for them, and despite it being one of the most popular game franchises of the 2000s, it has slowly started to slip away. And I just really hope that doesn't happen. I hope that ultimately PopCap and EA can just bring another kind of banger out the bag soon. Whether it is Plants vs Zombies 3 or maybe something else after that. I mean, there was obviously talk, wasn't there, of the Plants vs Zombies film, and you know what, who knows? At the end of the day, I really want to see this game succeed, this franchise succeed, and hopefully we will. Alright, Alright, so thank you for watching again. I appreciate this upload's a bit different as well to the other one. The other one obviously being history, and I suppose you could argue this is kind of history of the franchise of Plants vs. Zombies. But yeah, it's a bit of a different one. So the plan is for the channel from here onwards is to kind of give you a history upload, like a serious history upload, a bit like the other one, and then give you kind of maybe a game or film or book or just something else that isn't history, right? So that's the way I'm going to be going forward. Thank you again for watching, and let me know if you want any more kind of Plants vs Zombies content. I am thinking that the next few videos, kind of aren't the history videos, will be probably on games or films. So yeah, let me know what you want to see. If you want to see anything in particular, and if not, then yeah, see you around. All right. Bye.